Let's dive into the comments section. What does the whole mathematics thing have to do with the show about God, religion, atheism? Why did that even happen? What a waste of a show. Who thought a call about pi was good? What does this have to do with atheism? This man bored me to death talking about math. The caller wanted to correct one of our hosts on a point they made, something that all the hosts would hugely encourage. We have several ways you can do this via emailing tv@atheist-community.org, by visiting the fan-run resources, or indeed by calling and talking to the host directly. This past week, one of our hosts, Jimmy Jr., posted a correction to an error he made on his TikTok channel. We make mistakes. Sometimes we are wrong. And absolutely, we want to be corrected when we are. Let's do better as atheists. Let's be willing to listen when we might be wrong and not fall into the cult of personality and think that the hosts are correct all of the time. The callers may be wrong, and calling in allows the host to concede or defend what they said. Being willing to listen to criticism is very much part of a show about God, religion, and atheism. Otherwise, we simply become over-talking robots who block and cut off those who disagree with us, and getting angry, as one commenter did in the comments section, when I stated maths can be part of that conversation and part of the claim of evidence of God, and then insisting to me that I prove God using math. I await your answer. Shows exactly why atheists are prone to needing correction on occasion. This person clearly wasn't listening to the conversation and missed entirely what I said. Am I fired up? You bet I am. Am I ready to take calls? You bet I am. So whether you have a disagreement with one of the hosts today, or you want to convince us that your God or religion is true, get that phone picked up now, because the show is about to begin. Welcome, everyone. Today is November the 26th, 2023. I'm your host, Richard Gilliver, and joining me today is the amazing, the fantastic, the very, very wonderful Jim Barrows.
Hey, how's it going?
Very well. I say very well. I'm very well in myself. I do have a very, very sad announcement to make, however. One of our wonderful ACA family has passed away today. On Monday, Crew Cat died. And we are dedicating this episode to Crew Cat, also known to his family as Trace. We are running a fundraiser to purchase a brick for the Crew Cat at the building. If you'd like to help us memorialize Crew Cat, then please click the donate link below the chat. Any funds surpassing what is needed to purchase a brick will be added to the building fund. Please type !Crew Cat in the live chat to send your well wishes. Thanks for everybody at this time for your support, and please reach out, give Vern so much love. Crew Cat was more than just a pet. He was part of the ACA family, and he will really genuinely be sorely missed by all. That being said, Jim, we're here to take calls. What kind of calls are you looking forward to today?
Well, I'm kind of looking forward to that proof of God, not just the same old arguments rehashed over and over and over again. I know what the odds are.
It would be nice. I mean, we've been doing this show a number of years now, and we've yet to take that call.
Yeah,
we do have a wide range of callers, which are very exciting to take sometimes. And as much as they think they're giving us evidence of God's existence, I think the kind of bar they set for evidence is mighty low.
Yeah, I mean, any good evidence, and just because it's written in a book is not good evidence. Look at the trees, not good evidence. Moral argument, not good evidence. Argument from design, not a good argument from morality, and argument from design, not good arguments, not any evidence to back them up, because both of them, I think, have the same fatal flaw. If you're going to say that somebody did something, then you need to prove that somebody actually exists first, because you can't just take a set of facts and necessarily work your way backwards without knowing something about what you're looking for. So it's kind of like if you see a brand new track in the forest that no one has ever seen before, how do you work out what kind of animal it is? I mean, there are things you can look at and go, yeah, this kind of looks like these other animals, but then you're doing comparisons to other animals to get similarities, and none of that seems to work. So it just, yeah, hopefully we get some some better arguments, maybe some not rehashed arguments, and maybe some actual evidence to support those arguments would be nice.
Yeah, that's a great point you made as well about those arguments. Although if you want to call in with those arguments, and if you think you have a slightly different take, feel free.
Yep.
But I think even the classic arguments from design all stop short of actually demonstrating God exists. And they just kind of posit as an afterthought, well, it was God that did it.
Yeah. Well, they also stop short of proving design, right? Because that's the question, right? How do you prove design? How do you prove something is designed? If I show you an animal that uses cogs, is that animal designed? Except that's a leaf cutter. That's an actual critter that uses a cog mechanism to leap, and they leap farther than any other insect, but they also have a fatal flaw that cogs don't regrow. So, you know. How do you do that? So yeah, those would be things to answer. If you're going to bring your A game, make sure you have answers, because that's kind of where we're going. We're showing you our hand. Not that it should be any great difficulty to know where we're going to go with any particular argument. They're all been done before, right? It's not that we're smart. It's just that the arguments have not changed in 2,000 years for some of them. So.
Yeah, exactly that. And a lot of the calls we get are, well, not the calls necessarily, a lot of people making these arguments are people who have heard them for the first time and think they are really, really good until they are challenged. So if you've only just heard one of these arguments and you are convinced by them, and you want to have a little bit of pushback, and you're genuinely interested in where you might be going wrong in your conviction, do give us a call, because we're not going to bite your head off. We're here for a conversation. That's what we're here for.
Yeah.
And it's a mutual investigation. It's not just a case of, you're a theist, we're an atheist, we're going to shout at you. That's not what this show's about. Having said that, Talk Heathen is a product of the atheist community of Austin, a 501c3 non-profit organization dedicated to the promotion of atheism, critical thinking, secular humanism, and the separation of religion and government. Talk Heathen is a live call-in show, and we have open lines. So get your calls in at 512-991-9242 or from your computer at tiny.cc/callth. And as always, we will jump straight in with the question of the week. Talk Heathen to me. It's time for this segment where we go into the question of the week. And last week, we asked you, why did Christians really burn the witches? So number 3 was Kent Carlotto. The Christians didn't burn any witches. It was Antifa and BLM. Do your research. Just sarcasm at the end, just to make sure we know that it's sarcasm.
Yeah.
Number 2, Killer Cutthroat. The real reason Christians burned witches at the stake was because they thought they would get high from the smoke. It's a good enough reason, if any, Jim.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. If you're into that kind of thing, yeah.
And number 1, David Watt. The reason Christians burnt witches at the stake was so they could feel the warmth of Christ's love. Now, that is actually something that I could imagine being said as a reason for doing it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Jesus got nailed to the cross, but nowhere else do we see animal sacrifices getting burned at the cross, or getting nailed to the cross, or always getting burned. So, yeah, maybe the real sacrifice to God was to burn them to death, and that way you could have some nice, tasty barbecue.
Yeah, maybe that's
although 33-year-old man's probably a little gamey, a little much. Do prefer baby, so
much more tender, much more tender.
Exactly. Yeah.
The question of the week for next week is: God's creation won't be complete until it creates blank. Enter your best answer below the video, the comments, and next week we will reveal the top 3 answers. But let me ask Jim: God's creation won't be complete until it creates blank.
The great hanky to wipe his nose.
Yes, eggs. This is now. I think this is a really, really good answer, Jim, because people don't think that we were made in God's image. There's a fantastic book detailing the physicality of God called The Anatomy of God, which is out there. Really informative. And God indeed is supposedly had a physical body, and this is very, very often overlooked. That if he's got a normal body, a normal human body, then he has normal human functions, and he will need to sneeze and do little farties in his panties and all those other things that normal people have to do. So that's a great answer. Give us your shout in the comments, people, and let us know what you think.
And well, actually, I was a shout out to Douglas Adams and his. I don't remember which of the books, Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy's books, it was from, but one of the peoples of the galaxy believed that they were all snot hanging from their god's nose and feared the time of the great hanky. So anyway, I'm dating myself by reading those books. But if you haven't read Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, and don't judge the book by the movie, please. There's just no way that movie could do the greatness of the book justice. It was really, really bad. It was a bad movie, and it was a bad interpretation of the book. So anyway,
and on that, after Richard and Jim's book club for the week, we've both recommended a book already. Let's dive into calls. We're going to take Robert they from California, who wanted to add to your point, Jim, that you made about Alexander the Great on another show.
Yeah, I think. Yeah, Robert, I think first you're going to have to remind me what the point was. I'm sorry.
You want me to backtrack a little bit? Is that what you're asking?
Yes, please, because I don't remember what the comment was.
This was last week. The person said, claimed, as so many theists claim, that there's no evidence for the existence of Alexander the Great.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Yes. Claim I've heard many times.
Yeah, and they usually say that there's only one, and there's really 6, and then we have some archaeological evidence as well. So, yeah.
Yes, it's the art, and what surprised me, because frankly I found your answer weak, is that you didn't bring up the archaeological evidence, which is the best evidence. Wouldn't you say?
Yes, it was. But also, if I remember that conversation correctly, I really kind of wanted to stay on George Washington and the difference rather than go too deep into Alexander. But if I remember the conversation correctly.
But your caller mentioned Alexander.
Yeah.
Yeah. George Washington, there are a whole bunch of things that are said about him are completely untrue.
That too. Despite all the great evidence of the things that he did say, the things that he did do, we have a whole host of stuff that he didn't say and didn't do. So, yeah.
And as a matter of fact, with a lot of our founding fathers or heroes, the stuff attributed to them, there's no record of. But would you like me to discuss George Washington or Alexander the Great?
Alexander the Great. Why not?
Excellent. Okay. For example, there's a reliefs at the Shrine of the Bark at Luxor in Egypt, which mention Alexander by name. And these date back to Alexander's time. Secondly, there's a Mesopotamian tablet. I've looked up the archaeological number, BM 46761, which mentions Alexander by name. And the entry parallels the later accounts of Plutarch and Arrian, which are our main sources for, Alexander the Great, the information. I hope that was clear.
Pardon?
Hello, I hope that was clear.
Yeah. There's the Egyptian stuff, and then we've also got some evidence all the way from India, where we've got some evidence of him as well, campsites, and then also I believe there's some writings that far. So the question is if
there's an excellent book. It's called Alexander of Macedon by Peter Green, who lists all of that. And that's why I get very pissed off when I hear that argument, because it's fallacious.
Yeah.
For the simple reasons. The evidence goes against it.
Right. And there's 6 different authors that give us, and I believe most of them are historians, or several of them are historians. So they actually, tell us where they got their information from. We may not have those sources, but I mean, they're not making up stories, or they at least don't appear to be making up stories. And so again, we apportion our confidence to the evidence. And it, all of this leads us to a high confidence that Alexander the Great actually lived, actually did some things, and actually, we would have to explain why we see Greek army campsites on a more or less the path he took to get to India, according to the stories. There's so many things you have to explain, like what was he doing in Egypt? How did he get put on the stela and all this if he wasn't who history thinks he was, right? It's entirely possible that it was a different Alexander too, but until we have evidence to suggest that, we don't have any reason to believe it. So
no, absolutely none, because they're not going to refer to him just as Alexander. There's going to be something else to describe him,
right? Exactly.
But my point, getting to yours, that Mesopotamian tablet, the account given in that parallels the later accounts of Plutarch and Arrian. Now, Plutarch sometimes is not the most reliable, but in this case, I'll believe him because of the archaeological evidence which endorses him.
Right.
And obviously agree.
And those are all different authors, unlike what we have for the Bible proving Christ, right? We have one account, Mark, and then we have Matthew, which is 80% or better word for word copy of Mark. Luke and John are also copies, to slightly lesser degrees, but are also copies. So those aren't independent authors, right?
Except John, I have to disagree with you. John is completely different from all of the others.
You're right. And Luke is too.
John is entirely different. I could go through the Gospels. I mean, you see character development in all 4 of them. The Jesus, in the first Gospel of Mark, it's very secretive. He keeps saying, well, here I perform this miracle, and I want, but I want it to be kept secret. The God, compare that to the Jesus in John, who's epideictic. In other words, he likes to display.
Yes.
To show off.
Yeah, he is much more the Jesus is portrayed in the Mel Gibson movie. I like to think of that opening where it's just his feet walking in the sandy or in the dusty street, almost as if it's a Western face-off, right? Gives you that kind of vibe. He's much more that character than he is, don't tell anybody I'm doing this, right? Yeah.
That's more in the Mark tradition.
Yeah.
And then if you notice that, I mean, you're right about the copying. But notice but there's enough difference. And notice how the character develops.
Right. Well, also, it's not just the character that develops, right? It's also almost like somebody saw Mark and then went, oh, hey, how do you know he died? Well, he was buried in a tomb. Well, how do you know his body wasn't stolen? Well, there were Roman guards, right? And so you almost have apologetics happening within the stories themselves.
Well, yeah, I would say so, because what were the Gospels? They were advertisements. That's all they were. Advertisements for Christianity. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, they were written for the purposes of theology and not history, right? They weren't written to be historical evidence. They were written to be theological documents, like much of the Bible. was more about theology than it was about writing history. And I think that works too with with how we tell stories, right? Storytellers often adjust their stories to the listeners, either by using familiar landmarks or familiar names or things like that. They'll make slight changes to make the story to appease the audience more and to get the audience more interested in the story and to tell a better story in many cases. And we see that kind of thing. When the Last Supper was is kind of a question, because in Matthew, Mark, and Luke, it was before, not before the Sabbath, it was before the Passover, and John. I forget which way it went, but 3 of the stories have the Passover on the wrong or have the Last Supper before the Passover, so that Jesus could be killed on the Passover because he's a sacrificial lamb. So, that's kind of that there is theology. It's not about when was the actual Last Supper, when, was it Friday, Saturday, or Sunday when Jesus died? Those are the questions that we have. And yet those stories don't match up, in part because in the case of John, he's trying to make Jesus to be the sacrifice. And you can't have a sacrifice that doesn't happen, on Passover. So, yeah, it just, all this, the stories are just a different set of documented evidence that don't quite make it to good evidence that Jesus Christ existed as anything other than a man around whom stories grew up. And we just covered that, George Washington, whom we have great documentation for, and we have multiple heads of state, we have friends of his in other countries, we have his, and his own, and letters back and forth from people he was writing. They wrote back, and mentions in newspapers and all kinds of good stuff. And yet we have a whole body of myth and legend around him that came up. In a short period of time, right?
I'm sorry, what?
And in a short period of time. Yeah, we're here.
Yes, because Washington died in 1799.
Right.
So that's, but with George, like, for example, the story of, the I couldn't tell a lie story.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's Parson Weems. That came out afterwards.
Yeah.
Okay, that never happened. Throwing $1 across the Delaware, try it sometime if you're ever in the area.
Yeah. A coin would still be difficult, right?
$1, it would be impossible. There are a number of things. I mean, but again, most of the stuff we have about George, it's pretty true.
Yeah. Yeah. It did take long for myth and legend to build up. He wasn't seen as a holy character like we have in the Bible. So we don't have too many supernatural legends. We have some legends that are beyond human capacity, but I wouldn't say they're supernatural, like throwing a $1 over the Delaware River, never telling a lie. Those things are, I wouldn't call them superhuman, but they're not within the normal human bounds, right? There's no supernatural aspect to that. Whereas Jesus, we do have that supernatural aspect to it. So he gets to walk on water, calm storms, heal the sick, and do all this other stuff.
But if you notice in Mark, I mean, while there are miracles, there are fewer of them described than in the later books.
Yeah.
And that makes sense.
Yeah, exactly. If you're expanding on the legend, or putting the legend together, like Luke does, then you're gonna pick and choose which ones you want. You're not gonna pick the legend of Jesus Christ being a 5-year-old and killing his teachers and then resurrecting them, right? Or I think he was 5 when he did that, depending on which gospel you had. You're just not going to have that kind of stuff.
Well, almost. But there is the proto-gospel of Thomas.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you ever heard of it. It's one of the books which never got in.
Right,
the Apocrypha. And I don't know if you've read it, but
I have not read it, but yeah.
Yeah, there are two Gospels of Thomas, but I'm talking about the proto-gospel.
Okay.
And
yeah, I haven't read any of the stuff that's not in the Bible yet, so.
Yeah, I advise you read it. It'll be amusing. And Jesus is he's a brat in that.
Yeah.
And if you notice, there is nothing in the Bible about Jesus' youth.
Yeah.
Or how he grew up.
Yeah, and that's kind of interesting too, right? If you're trying to do a complete, you do cover where he came from and what made him unique and influences like that. We just don't have anything until he's 33 and he just kind of shows up on the scene. We get a little bit about his birth, and then we get his birth, and then we get 33. And two stories about what happened in the meantime, right? One, he ran away to Egypt. One, he didn't.
Out of curiosity, there's a story in the Bible which I can definitely disprove, and not because it's supernatural.
Maccabees?
Do you want to know what that is?
Maccabees?
No.
Okay.
Okay. If you go to John 3, we were discussing this gospel. John, he has a conversation with Nicodemus.
Okay.
And Jesus says, or it is translated, you must be born from above. But Nicodemus misunderstands it to mean you must be born again. Now, the point is that in Greek, the words for from above also mean again. Whereas if they'd been speaking Aramaic or Hebrew, you wouldn't have the problem. The point is, would two Jews at that time have been speaking Greek to each other?
Yeah, I don't know.
Probably not.
I mean,
but here it is. They're having a private conversation.
Yeah. Yeah, but I mean, the Jews were pretty Hellenized. Well, but they weren't educated. So yeah, they probably wouldn't be speaking Greek if they weren't educated.
They would have spoke either Hebrew or Aramaic.
Yeah.
Okay.
Richard, you're being awfully quiet over there.
What?
I wondered when someone was going to bring me in. I find this whole thing very, the whole kind of place where they go, very interesting, and even without kind of delving in to the Alexander the Great thing so much, I find the fact that they try and use him quite dishonest, because
you're right.
Even if they think that Alexander the Great, there isn't much evidence, or even if they think there's no evidence incorrectly, as you've both already pointed out, if they think there's no evidence for Alexander the Great, why don't they use Cleopatra as a comparison to Jesus? And the reason they don't use Cleopatra as a comparison to Jesus, who was much closer in time to Jesus, by the way, than Alexander the Great. There's only 30 years difference between her death and Jesus' alleged birth. The reason they don't use someone like Cleopatra is because we have thousands of lines of evidence for Cleopatra, not just from historians, but from her own time. We have different styles of busts. We have some in the Greek style. We have some in the Egyptian style, which were commissioned to look like her. We have carvings on the sides of pyramids showing her and the son, with literally carvings that were done in her own lifetime. We have coins. We have so much we know of all about our line, the Ptolemies. We have so much to demonstrate. And you would think if someone was going for a fair comparison of two figures in history, they would use two that were very, very close together, two that were geographically very, very close together. And it seems blatantly obvious the reason they don't use Cleopatra and they like to jump to people like Alexander the Great is because they don't want a fair comparison. What they want to do is to try and throw as much out there as possible to legitimize Jesus as much as possible. So what's the best way of doing this? Look for the one that you've been told, because they clearly haven't read the research themselves. Or, as you've both already commented on, they would have the coins with Alexander's name on from the time. They would have the archaeology. They would already have this stuff. So they wouldn't use it as a comparison. They'll listen to crap internet apologists who throw out Alexander the Great had no evidence, so why do you believe in him and not Jesus? It's nonsense. It's dishonest. And, you know, if you are one of those people who thinks that that's a good argument, give us a call. You know, we've got someone pulling us up, pulling one of the hosts up on not giving enough evidence for Alexander the Great. You know, and where are the Christians here? Where are you defending these claims? If you're one of these people who think this, call in. Give us that evidence. But it seems wholly dishonest to use that, to try and use Alexander the Great. That's really my only opinion on this whole thing. I think it's a silly argument to begin with.
I do too. You know, I mean, you said nothing, which I disagree with. But I would like to add something. That term Cleopatra, if I remember from my readings of Egyptian history, you know, ancient history, there were about 8 queens who had that title. I just thought I'd let you know that.
Okay, fair enough. Fair point.
Yeah.
But you know, I look at it this way: if people have to lie about something to defend it, it's not worth anything what they're defending.
Yeah, I agree. And or at least misrepresent the facts or misstate the facts because they haven't actually done the research, right? I mean, it's entirely possible that whoever started there's only one source for Alexander the Great probably only knew of one source and was speaking off the top of his head. Now it gets repeated over and over and over again. You know, we were talking earlier, Richard was talking earlier about, you know, hosts being wrong and people being wrong. And that's why you should always fact check everything. Go back and double check your sources before you repeat it. Otherwise, you are repeating inaccurate information. Don't know if you're lying or not, because I don't know if you know the truth. But I mean, Richard and I talk, you know, in this format, talk top of our heads all the time. And we probably say things that aren't quite exactly as true as we would like them if we're not careful.
Yeah, I agree. Check. My saying is, however simple, it starts with the facts.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
There's no way of getting around that.
Yeah. And that's why
would you want it not to? Though this is the thing that I don't understand. Why would you, regardless of what position you're coming from, whether what worldview you've got, what religion you follow, if no religion, anything, why would you want to go out there onto a public forum and make statements and try and at best, you know, let's be generous. Some of these people are just phoning to genuinely convince us of their deeply held beliefs, and there are other ones who are calling us to try and ridicule and who will blatantly, as we know, lie to kind of get the point across. But why would you want to go into the public sphere and say something that you know is not true to try and win an argument? You know, I've had debates with Christian apologists before.
You can ask.
You know, the most recent one, who I will not name, who was immensely dishonest through that debate. You know, and it's frustrating. And you know, we don't want to play games of sophistry. We want, you know, conversations about what people believe and why they believe it. So why not just present it? And if you're right, you're right, and you can make us look stupid. And if you're wrong, you're wrong. And then it gives you an opportunity to learn.
Of course. But I think you should ask Donald Trump that question.
I'm British.
Yeah, let's avoid the politics for a bit. But yeah, I mean, but you could ask that of anybody, right? Of, where did you get that information? Politicians are infamous for doing this kind of thing where they are giving us part of the truth and only the part of the truth, but I think this is true of everybody, right? We're not as careful with our source material as we should be. We repeat things that we've heard, and sometimes we'll repeat them inaccurately. But at least, most of the time when we repeat things inaccurately here, we will correct it. And you may not know that we've corrected if you don't watch every show. Or in some cases, someone will make a mistake on TikTok and then correct it on this show, as has happened in the past. So, yeah, those are all things that happen. And unfortunately, we don't always go back and fix things.
Okay. Even getting into the political realm, there is something that's going around, and it's untrue, completely untrue, that the Ku Klux Klan was formed by the Democrats.
Like the what Klan?
The Ku Klux Klan.
Oh, no, that wasn't Democrats. Who started that? Yeah.
No, I'll tell you, it was 4 people. It started in Tennessee. Pulaski, Tennessee was the name of the city. And this is in 1865. The war had just ended, and it was a bunch of people, 4 people, and they would just get out and what would be a good term? It was nonviolent, and entertain themselves.
Right.
This we know because of later newspaper interviews of the same 4 people who happen to have lived for a while. It had nothing to do with the Democratic Party. But I've heard 2 people state it was founded by the Democratic Party to promote the Democratic Party. And that's deadly.
Yeah.
That's dangerous.
Well,
Agreed.
I know there's only one state that's actually banned the KKK, and that is Nebraska. And I believe it was done by the Republicans in Nebraska, who the Republican legislature, which I think is also the only state with a unicameral legislature. But yeah, they banned it, and they were Republicans when they did it. And they were all Republican members. So it was at least multi-party. I'm sure there are Democrats who belong to it because that kind of stupidity transcends political parties.
Yes, you're right. I agree. Yeah, but it's a dangerous thing to spread.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And let's face it, the Republican Party right now is in a position where the only thing they can do is accuse other people of doing the same thing they're doing. And they're doing
good Republican right now is a former Republican.
Yeah.
If I may, we have gone slightly off.
Yeah,
topic.
We're off topic.
I'm sorry.
I'm all for a good conversation about why Jesus Christ is wrong, but when we get into like current politics, we're not really, in the remit of what we want to be talking about.
Well, it's another example of they're even closer to us in time. I mean, the founders of the KKK were closer to us in time than even George Washington, and yet we have myth and legend building up, even though we have better sources for information, better sources, even in the 60s, the 50s, 60s, whenever it was created, we have better sources now, and we still have legends growing up. So how do you not have legends growing up about Jesus Christ? Even faster, well, not faster, but over more time, with the primary form of communication being word of mouth, right? And we know that word of mouth is the worst way to transmit information. Because it will get corrupted in just 2 or 3 iterations, or 2 or 3 repeats. So how do you not get that, and how do you go ahead?
Because when you were going on, about people believing lies, spouting them, I'm sorry, but Donald Trump was just a perfect example.
Yeah. That's fine, but it's not Talk Politics, it's Talk Heathen.
Yeah,
And,
exactly.
you know,
I know.
there are lots of other examples we could use other than current political candidates.
The question is how do you eliminate the myth, the legend, to get to the real person? And the only way you can do that is to look for documentation outside of, you know, for corroborating documentation. And the only things that we have outside of the Bible are other people talking about the Christians, and not necessarily getting, you know, they're not going and interviewing Christians in some cases. They're talking about Christians and what they think they believe, and some of that's been edited, right? Some of those things have been edited. So how do you eliminate legend building type stories from the real story?
Yeah, and we know how the Gospels were kind of put together anyway. We know that they started as oral traditions. We know that they were, you know, they developed into written collections of miracle stories and parables and sayings. We know that we had written proto-Gospels, which preceded and served as sources for the Gospels. And we know that the canonical Gospels were composed from these sources. We also know that the 4 canonical Gospels were not mentioned until somewhere between 120 and 150 by Justin Martyr. That's, you know, if we take the earliest of those dates, so 120, the year 120, that's 90 years after the alleged death of Jesus. That's 90 years in which these oral traditions, these written collections of miracle stories and parables, these proto-gospels can get changed. They've got different influences coming into them. The passing between different people. We know that the first, roughly the first 100 years of, you know, Jesus, disciples for Jesus, if you like, were kind of largely Jewish. And after that period, then it started spreading outwards and moving away from that Judaism that it was part of. So we already have all of this information, which really, really informs us of all the chances and all the opportunities for things to be misconstrued, things to be passed down and misinterpreted, things to be made up to push a certain agenda. We know that all of these things had that time. That's 90 years since the Gospels were first mentioned by, as I say, I think it was Justin Martyr who first mentioned them. And that's a long, long time for that information. And this isn't like, you know, to kind of keep away from the political stuff. This isn't Elvis Presley who died, and within a couple of years we already had rumors and ideas and
the day after his death we had rumors of him being cited.
Yeah. Already, and this is a time when we didn't have that huge amount of media for one of the, you know, the icons of the media, and all that attention around it coming in, all those cameras, all those people following him. When that wasn't the case in Jesus's time. You know, you had a few people who were followers of him and who kind of kept the dream alive, if you like.
Let me add something to what you were stating, and all of which I agree with. But notice, and Bart Ehrman's books are so good with this, the Christianity practiced during, let's say, about the time of Paul is completely different from the Christianity practiced nowadays in its various incarnations. Completely. The beliefs were different.
Absolutely.
Yeah, exactly.
Absolutely, we were.
And they'd have been different from town to town, even though those towns were, you know, next to each other geographically and had a road between them. The beliefs would have been different between the two because they still relied on word of mouth, right? They relied on people telling stories. So,
and frankly, they had so many different churches, those pastors, and I'm just using that term loosely, you know, for want of a better one, probably made up a lot of things as they went along.
Yeah. Yeah. And they had to in some cases.
They made it up.
Yeah. Yeah. Without it, I mean, that's how legend building gets started, right? And they're not intentional lies. They're little white lies. They're little, color to add to the story, right? They're things to make the story better and more relevant. Like I said before, you change the story to make it more relevant to your audience. And if you're an itinerant traveler, you're going to get an idea of what that town is about before you start telling stories, and so that you can make the story more interesting to the people who are trying to listen to you. I mean, that's just the basics of good storytelling. When people are were a lot more isolated than they are today, we think nothing of driving 4 hours and in 4 hours being 100 150 miles away from somebody.
Right.
Well, the only thing you can do is walk at 4 miles an hour. A 4 hour walk doesn't get you very far. A day's walk doesn't get you very far. And so communities were a lot more isolated, and they didn't travel as much as we do today. So you don't have a homogenous society like we do today in the United States or Germany or Europe, for that matter, is just because people travel more, because they can't, because cars go fast. So yeah, I think that anything in that time period is going to be very fragmented.
Sure. I agree wholeheartedly with everything you said, but I wanted to comment on something that you made, that we don't have, that the works near to Jesus' time are considerably after Jesus' time. And you made a comment of that they mostly describe what Christians believed, which is true. We only have about 4 or 5 snippets. But I was wondering if you've read the one from from Lucian, called The Passing of Peregrinus?
No, I haven't. I haven't actually read the things. I've read people, somewhat on what people have said about them, but I haven't read them myself yet.
I suggest you do. You seem to be a type of guy who likes a great laugh.
I have a huge reading list. Richard, do you know anything about that particular?
I've not read that particular one, no, and I have done actually quite a lot of reading in this area, but I've not read this one.
Oh, Lucian's one of my favorite authors. Actually, he was a Syrian who was fluent in Greek, but it's hilarious. And notice when you read these, what they're saying Christians believe, they're very pejorative. They're looking down upon the Christians. Have you ever noticed that, if you've read any of the snippets?
There's lots of things that we're given as from our Christian callers and Christian friends who are trying to give us kind of their interpretation of what went off that didn't actually happen in the way that they happened. They want to make out it happened. One of the examples is the kind of persecutions of the Christians, and which, of course, there was a persecution of Christians. But if you listen to Christians talking about it, they will say that they were persecuted because because they were Christians, and they weren't persecuted because they were specifically Christians. They were persecuted because they were taking in a place that was largely ruled by the Roman gods. Things were happening, natural disasters were happening, and because they weren't worshipping the Roman gods, they were seen as causing those things. They could have been any religion. It wasn't because they were Christian that they were persecuted. It was because they weren't following the Roman gods. And it's tiny, tiny details, subtle details like this that can change the whole focus of like how you understand history to have unfolded. But listen, we thank you. We're going to let you go, Robert. We do appreciate the call.
It's been a great conversation.
It has been a great conversation, and we do appreciate it. And there's so many things I could have kind of fit. We went into so many places. There was a great comment made about the fact that what modern Christians are following wasn't what the earlier Christians were following. And there's several ways you can take that. You can kind of look into the fact that modern Christianity was kind of influenced a lot by Platonism, And, the whole concept of heaven, the soul going to heaven when you died, came from that. We could have gone to the fact that even before the Bible was written down in a single language, the Bible we have today was written down in a single language. We'd had places even as far away from the Middle East as Britain, where I am, where you had communities of Christian who'd already been practicing Christianity for 200 or so years without the Bible.
Right.
Through missionary work and through what they'll said. There's so much that conversation opened up that was really interesting, and we could have gone down for further routes. I would like to go down those routes with Christians to kind of get their take on it.
Yeah.
But I think some of that conversation is, they're really worthwhile having. Jim, what are your opinions on that before I do a few announcements?
So I know apologists like to make a big deal of how soon after Christ's life the stories were written. And I am actually less concerned about the time than the number of years that it passed through. Because that's where you're going to get the story change, right? Is when you go from the oral tradition, and we see that in modern times, like we said earlier, Elvis, sightings of Elvis happened the day after he died, and so you have, that's a modern equivalent of what could have been happening in Jesus's time. Rumors of his death happened, and then teachings, but all that happens through ears. And we know it doesn't take too many of those before the story gets distorted beyond the original. So it's less for me about time and more about how many years passed through it before it got written down. And then again, how do you extract legend building and story improvement from the original? And I don't know that we can, right, in this particular case. So.
Yeah, it's such an interesting area of investigation to go into, and as a caller said, I would recommend anybody do like a little bit of research into it. But I would just say, and this is a point I try and push all the time because the caller mentioned Bart Ehrman, and Bart Ehrman's brilliant. I'm not saying he's not, but there are Christian believing scholars who will. I've got two academic books on the formation of the New Testament. One is from Bart Ehrman. One is from a guy called John Drain, who's a Christian. And the conclusions they come to, because they are following the scholarship, they are following the evidence, is almost the same. So don't stay away from Christian scholars just because they're Christian. You are doing yourself a disservice. There are some really, really good believing scholars out there who can separate their belief from the evidence. So as much as I'd recommend Bart Ehrman, don't limit yourself to just reading non-Christian. Okay, so we've just had a couple of technical difficulties. Without further ado, let's get back to the show. We're going to take Phil, him from Texas, who says he's catching heat from atheists for recently rejoining a church. Phil, how are you?
Gentlemen, Jim, Richard, I hope you're both well.
Yeah.
We're
doing better than our technology at the moment.
Yes, well, to err is human. To truly fuck things up requires a computer.
Amen. Preach it, brother.
So I'll be kind of quick. I'm a longtime atheist. I'm 65 years old, and I'm a longtime atheist, skeptic, secular humanist. About 3 months ago, I rejoined my church of origin. They are a very liberal, progressive, vanilla brand. If you know anything about the Disciples of Christ, they're a pretty welcoming church. And I did this for three reasons. Number one, I was getting socially isolated, and I found a wonderful community up there. Number two, it is a good nexus to do community good, to distribute food, to help people who need it, etc. Number three, it can be a center for some serious religious study, for some scholarship and some learning. And again, the disciples are, in fact, from the pulpit a few weeks ago, the minister said, if you're an atheist, if you're a skeptic, if you're a humanist, you're welcome here, which impressed me. I have common political goals with these people. They are absolutely in favor of separation of church and state. They believe in social programs. they are pro-choice. So I found that a better community for common political goals than I had found in any of the humanist or political clubs I had joined.
Mm-hmm.
But some atheists, and I hear this phrase several times, well, the liberal Christians are just giving the conservatives cover. And I don't understand that. I don't know what that means.
So when you're they'll say something along the lines of, that's just that church. My church doesn't believe that. And so that's giving the conservatives, the hardcore evangelicals, the Pastor Locks and the nut jobs like him cover, because not all Christian churches believe everything that he believes. And honestly, I think that's what they're getting at, because I don't use the phrase, it's just, it's a completely ridiculous phrase. We have to recognize that Christians fall on a spectrum. Some of them, like the church you found, are pretty nice guys, like the church that the ACA occasionally uses their facilities for events. There's a Christian church that's nearby that is as liberal as the one you just described. In fact, it's so liberal, the pastor is in fact an atheist. And we use their church sometimes for events. So yeah, I don't get it either. It's completely ridiculous to me. Do you have anything like that on your side of the pond there, Richard?
Yeah, there's a few churches like that, but I think the thing for me is I'm glad you answered that in the way you did answer it, Jim, because I was going to come from a totally different direction, and I have a lot to do with a lot of religious people due to the academic stuff I do in religious studies.
Mm-hmm.
And, I very often visit mosques or churches or Buddhist temples and talk to these people and take part in, I don't practice it, but I take part in their ceremonies as I sit quietly when words of affirmation and things are going on and just observe. When I've been invited to those places, I can tell you now, there's nothing finer than being invited to an Eid meal at a mosque when you sat down with a load of other people sharing a fine feast. It's brilliant, and that people are so staunch in the kind of anti-religious attitude that they take offense that you're doing this. I find somewhat bewildering.
Yeah.
It's completely different to you going along and kind of excusing the religion, saying, well, I do believe in God, but I'm kind of an atheist at the same time, but that's not what you're doing. You're not kind of doing any of that stuff. You're literally going along for community. Right. And with people who you find like-minded, and and secularity says this all the time. He says, I would much rather have a liberal Christian on my side than somebody who's an atheist but hard-headed and right-wing. Being an atheist does not mean you're skeptical. It doesn't mean you're a critical thinker. So just your opinion on that one question, if that's going to inform you to kind of be I don't know how they are with you. I don't know whether they're aggressive or whether they just sit there quietly tutting in the corner that you do this. But regardless of what they do, that kind of attitude it's a little bit stinky. It's not something that it makes for good companionship. I don't think if somebody I have many friends, despite people in Britain being. Most of the people I know are atheist, and I've got a few religious friends, but most of the people I know are atheist. Virtually every single person I know believes in ghosts. I'm not going to sit and tut at people and not talk to people because they believe in something that I don't accept. If they go along to a psychic evening, I might have a conversation if they're willing to have it about it and about the merits of doing so. But I'm not going to get aggressive with them or sit and tut at them because they're choosing to spend their time in a certain way and I don't agree with it. That's ridiculous. So I say personally, keep on doing what you're doing, and if anybody's got a problem with it, because that's, as far as I'm concerned, that's what they deserve. It's if they're going to have a genuine conversation with you, and maybe come along with you and talk to people who are open to having the conversations about why they believe in God, that's fair enough. That's a completely different thing. But just to simply sit there and kind of and naysay you because you're choosing to have community in your life, get a fucking life, man. Come on, you've got better things to do than criticize people for that.
Yeah. And if you're privileged enough to live in an area where there's a lot of stuff going on, secular stuff going on, where you can go to bowling leagues or gaming conventions or do a whole bunch of stuff, then that's a privilege you have that not everybody does. I'm currently in a relatively large town called Dothan. It's not as large as Austin or Phoenix or any of the places that I've lived, but there aren't a lot of options for secular stuff going on here. When you hit Facebook and Meetup, there's not a whole heck of a lot going on in this town there. So if you find a group of people that you can get along with, on 95% of the stuff, or even 60% or 51, depending on where you live, that's great, because community is what makes us happy. And if you disagree with that, and go disagree with the 80-year study that Harvard's done on the topic of happiness and what makes humans happy. So I don't get this gatekeeping that some atheists do about people who, like yourself, who want to attend church because they enjoy the service, they enjoy the singing, and they enjoy the community, and they enjoy doing stuff after ice cream socials or whatever else goes on there. Cool, good for you. Especially if it's a liberal church. Maybe some people like getting abused when they go to church, so that they may like Pastor Locke because, oh, look, I'm going to get abused here. I'm not going to comment on that. You do you. But yeah, I don't get it either. It's annoying.
I'm certainly not there to challenge anyone's belief. I'm kind of the token skeptic. I'm the token atheist. So when we're in Sunday school and something comes up, I might say, well, that is a theological story, not a historical study. We're studying Jacob, right?
Mm-hmm.
And right. I pointed out that, well, that's basically a story. Now, it may have value as a story. Mm-hmm. I also found out last month that our church has applied and been accepted to whatever organization does this to have the badge of LGBTQ acceptance. We are upfront about, if you're gay, fine, come on in, no problem.
Awesome.
So if I found a Republican who was pro-choice and for social programs and for reducing military spending, I wouldn't disavow them just because they wore the Republican label. And I don't think atheists should disavow liberal Christians just because they wear the Christian label.
Exactly. I agree. It's all about, are we going in the same direction? And we can have slight disagreements about whether or not a God exists. Because honestly, that shouldn't be your entire identity. It's not my entire identity for sure. It's not even my entire identity while I'm talking to you on this show, to be honest. So it makes no sense. And this type of gatekeeping and this type of purity is just ridiculous. I don't get it. We got room for everybody. If they're going the same direction we want to go, then great. And who cares about what labels they wear or what political party they're with? It just doesn't matter.
Yeah, I agree. And I think the thing is as well, the thing is as well, is you have got, and I know you don't want to challenge them, and that you don't have to challenge them. And this is the thing that's great about these things, and this is what we aim for on this channel as well. We want to have mutual investigations into things and into ideas. And, you can do that, and you can represent yourself the way you are, and you can speak to people without, getting in the face and shouting and being aggressive at them. And you know, you going to church might actually open the door for a lot of those people to kind of be more interested in the way you're thinking, and saying, well, why do you think that? Why are you thinking that? And it might open the door for a lot of people to come in and actually start being more interested in having these conversations about atheism and about, you know, good reasons for God being existing. If you weren't there, those opportunities wouldn't be there.
Mm-hmm.
And it's you don't have to be in the face challenging them. Just being there and being yourself and being a presence, it might be enough for some people. The one thing I would take with caution, based on what you've just said, and I think it's an amazing thing that they've applied for the LBGT plus status, but I would, with caution, if you catch anybody saying going down the will of the sinner but not the sin route, I would challenge that, because there's a difference between you know, being open to LGBTQ plus people coming into the church and supporting them, and actually being supportive of their lifestyles and what they do. And, you know, I would take something like that with an air of caution, and that is something I personally would challenge. But other than that, I don't think there's a problem with it. I think me and Jimmy were kind of both on the same page with this.
Well, I am certainly not there to deconvert or deconstruct anyone. I was a religion major in undergraduate college at a liberal Christian university, so I have some interesting information. And I want to bring a little bit more serious Bible scholarship to the church. And like I say, I'm just there to let them pick my brain if they wish. I don't have arguments with anybody, although I have to say, I have to get this out there. I called into another show several weeks ago, and Aaron Ra, who I love, said, well, maybe they're just fattening you up, which I took some umbrage.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm just fattening them up, Aaron.
Exactly.
Anyway, but thank you. You make me feel a little better. I'm just there to learn and to teach.
Yeah. And those are the two great things. Teach what you know and learn what you don't. Nothing better than that.
Yeah, thank you for your call, Phil. We do appreciate it, and I think that was a good call again, because again I think it's an important point to make. I think some people think as atheists that they have to kind of stay away from churches, or they'll set a fire when they cross the threshold. You know, if you know, where I live, there's a lot of beautiful churches. You could go along just for the architecture, if nothing else. You know, you're allowed to enjoy that. You're allowed to enjoy. You know, one of our questions in the poll this week is about kind of religious secular art forms with religious themes, converting people, and you're allowed to listen to religious songs and enjoy them if you're an atheist. It's not something you have to turn your back on if you enjoy that just because you're an atheist. It's this kind of hardline attitude is not healthy for you as an individual, and it's not helpful for the community at large.
It's awfully fundamentalist of atheists to do that, right?
Yeah,
and that's not what we should be.
Exactly. So we're going to take another call shortly, but of course, as always, we are going to give a shout out to the top 5 patrons. As always, when I say we, what I mean is Mr. Jim Barrows is going to give, if we've got the top 5 patrons, yes, we have, is going to shout them out, as we always get the guests to do.
Well, we've got Dingleberry Jackson, probably still the best name on the list, just from the name standpoint. Oops, all singularity. Devor Valjean. I probably mispronounced that last name, and I apologize. I'm definitely mispronouncing the next one. Kalevi Helveti. Kalevi Helveti. I don't know. I apologize for butchering your name. Left of the Leaves. An honorable mention goes to Jeanette Corlett Black. Thank you, folks, for supporting us. We do appreciate it. We literally can't do this without you because everything we do costs money, even though Richard and I and most of the people on the...
It's best to try and smite us.
I think so.
Working. And we are back. If that's the best God has to offer, then I think he needs to try a little bit harder. You're not a very good God, are you, sir? No, sirree. For the third time, I'm going to bring Q in to have the conversation about Kant's refutation of the arguments for the existence of God. Q, how are you?
Yep. Hey. So I wanted to call in and talk about Kant's various different proofs or refutations against the proof of God. So I haven't seen any of the previous episodes talk about this. Are you guys familiar with this?
Vaguely. It's not something I've studied in depth.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with it.
Overread a little bit. Is essentially he started off with the kind of the arguing against the ontological, teleological, all those things as invalid, and then kind of developed it a little bit further. But you go into it and tell us what what it was specifically you wanted to talk about. Fill in the gaps.
Yeah. So it's been a while since I talked about this with other people. Quite a few years since I was in the university. Richard, you're right. So he has essentially a refutation of different main types of proofs of God, and it's interesting because a lot of it is stuff that we hear when people call in. It's just, it's just a different name. So the ontological argument is basically the argument that God is perfect, so he must exist, kind of thing. And then there's a cosmological argument, which is basically the Kalam argument, right? The Kalam argument is also called a Kalam cosmological argument. And then the third one is the teleological one, which says, if the third is the teleological argument, which basically says there's some purpose that we need to that's out there, and so for that purpose there must be a God, right? So those are the three types, and you hear one, some flavor of this used by theists all the time. Follow so far?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So I just want to kind of go over this or kind of give different examples of these, and kind of using examples of what I've heard in some of the past shows, and then give what Kant's response to this would be. And one thing to know is, Kant is a very famous German idealist. So he believes in, things that are beyond our senses, these ideal things. And in a certain sense, he kind of considers, that to be kind of God's realm. And his whole point is that you really can't have access to that, what he calls the noumena, the noumenal realm, which is, where the perfect forms, etc., kind of similar to Aristotle, Plato's forms would exist. So he says that doesn't exist. And what we have is access to the phenomena, which is what we can see and sense, etc. And he kind of
just quickly before you jump into this, what can I ask you what your kind of positioning on this? Is this something you agree with? Do you agree with Kant, or do you disagree with him and have your own kind of arguments against these things? I'm just interested on your own personal position in this.
Yep. Yeah. So I was really into Kant, and in fact, I did my undergrad thesis on him, but not on his ethics or his proof of God. But at the time, I was really into his refutation. But one thing to consider is that Kant actually goes and tries to say that there is a God. So Kant is not an atheist; he's a theist. So for me personally, I feel I'm a hard atheist. I do not believe that God exists. So that's my position.
Okay. So why don't you give us one rejection of one of the arguments for God, and we need to talk about that.
Yeah. So the one I like the best is this the argument against the ontological argument. So the argument again is to say that that God is being perfect, that if God did not exist, it would not be perfect. So thereby, God has to exist simply because of his perfection. And the simple refutation of that, obviously there's more, is that existence is not a predicate, meaning that existence is not a property that you can assign to a God. It's basically a state. So you have an existential state. So you could have a God that has all the properties of perfection, but existence is not a property, so it's not one of it. The example is like, he talks about two different types of judgments. One is the analytic judgment, where the predicate is contained in the subject. So the example is, all bachelors are unmarried. The very nature of being a bachelor comes with it, it being unmarried, he being unmarried. Mm-hmm. And then there's a synthetic judgment where you're adding something to it, adding a predicate to the subject. So the example is, the cat is on the mat. So it being on the mat is not part of the property of the cat. And what Kant is saying is that God exists is not bachelors are unmarried, it's a cat is on the mat type of judgment. That your concept of God, and if you add to it, or if you say it exists, you are adding something to it that's not part of that. So it's not part of the ontology.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I like that, and I think that kind of that rests quite well with Hume's kind of ideas about the rejection of God as well, because in Hume we get the idea that in essentially in Hume's kind of ideas are that we get what comes into our mind is what comes in from outside is real, and we cannot imagine something that we haven't got experience of. Therefore, we can't have this idea of this perfect God, because all we're doing is we've never seen this perfection. So what we're doing is we're just magnifying these qualities of good that we do know to this ultimate thing. And therefore this perfect being that we imagine as God cannot exist. And I think that marries quite well with what you've just said about Kant. I don't know what you think about that. I'd like to have your kind of feedback on that.
So it's interesting because, Kant, his critique of pure reason, he begins it by basically saying that David Hume woke him up from his slumber to, push him to write that huge treatise. So there is a connection between Kant and Hume, but Kant is, you could almost say he's the opposite extreme. Although, as you pointed out, there are some similarities. Hume would never say that there is this kind of this realm, this, essentially kind of sort of a spiritual realm, the noumena. Hume would never say that, but all of Kant's philosophy revolves around that.
Yeah, I like that. Jim, any thoughts?
No, I mean, I don't hear anything I disagree with or can add to. The ontological argument is, I think, ridiculous on its face. I can't imagine a greater God than the one in the Bible, and a greater God than most Christians attribute to. So I don't see how that means that God actually exists. I don't see how you get monotheism out of that either, but those are completely different questions for going on what we can imagine. But yeah.
Yeah,
So
think
I mean,
I think
go ahead.
I think this is really interesting because, as you said, Kant, did have leanings towards theism, shall we say? But also, he believed in things like free will and things like that. So it's really interesting when you get philosophers like Kant, who kind of will, on one end of the spectrum we would probably agree with, and on the other end of the spectrum we would probably disagree with. And it's great diving into those guys. Like I say, he's not someone I've personally looked into very much. I've just kind of read brief overviews and whatnot. So it's great to have a call talking specifically about Kant's philosophy. I was wondering what if you had any criticisms of the things like free will that he did accept and the belief in God and things. If you have, because you're obviously, you seem to know quite a lot about Kant, and you seem to be very enamored with some of his arguments. So, what about those that you disagree with from him?
Well, I mean, I disagree with the proof that he gives it's not really a proof, but how he sort of demonstrates that God exists. And the reason why I disagree with it, and, it's something that I didn't know at the time, but he basically has a precept argument for God. And he puts it as basically, as part of his ethics, his morality, that he feels that there must be a God. You have to kind of presuppose a God for there to be this objective deontological morality. So and it's not necessarily a Christian God, but the idea that there is something beyond the phenomena that's there that provides the duty, the onus, and also on a free will side that it's kind of coming from that that God, and you can't really have this a moral action that's done in free will unless there is God. So I don't agree with that.
Isn't it great that we get these kind of and I'm not just talking about your let's face it, shit YouTube philosophers, but like even your classical philosophers who are out there, and you get this kind of thing, and those that believe in God seem to fall into two categories. They seem to fall into those that will either presuppose God exists at the beginning, or kind of when you get these arguments from design. And they go through these, Anselm did it, where you go through these elaborate arguments of, the world looks like it was designed, etc. And then at the end with, well, it must be God. Everybody knows it's God, don't they? And it's just like a really crap ending. There's no thought being put into it. It's just a supposition that if of all these candidate designers, even if we said for the sake of argument the world had been designed, of all the candidate designers we have, whether it's some kind of alien species that have designed the universe in a kind of contact way, like in Carl Sagan's novel, or whether it's these whether it's like me and Jim talked about, I think last time when we were on this show, this idea of a synthetic universe, like what's the word I'm looking for? This created like from a computer simulation, the simulation type universe, and we've got these different candidates, and yet these great philosophers who are theists seem to disregard all these other candidate explanations just in favor of, well, it's God though, innit? That's it. It's just God, and that's what they fall back on, and I find that really kind of. I find it frustrating in one light, but I find it really amusing in another, that they've like put all these thought into these elaborate arguments and then just kind of rest on this and they're just pretty crap just conclusion.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I see. I mean, when I watch some of these videos and also in the comments, I definitely see a lot of theists who, try to make an argument, but at the end of the day, it just comes down to, I feel like there's a God, so that, that's what I will believe. So, there's that, they basically don't care that it's a crap argument as long as, it confirms their viewpoint.
Yeah, it's almost like they've been sold on the idea of God and then try to use reason to justify their quote unquote purchase of the God's concept, right? Rather than starting from a clean slate and working their way to God. They don't ever truly do that. They just seem to start with God and then work backwards, and that's never going to work. We know that that's the case for William Lane Craig, right? Because he's admitted it in public multiple cases. Is he got sold on the idea of God, and then he uses the Kalam to justify his belief rather than the other direction. So yeah, it's amazing. Absolutely amazing.
Yeah, I mean, on the other side too, I mean, I see a lot of atheists who try to argue against God and, struggle themselves because they're, they really can't provide a really good argument. And so what I see mostly is, atheists basically saying that, well, you have to convince me. So, the burden of proof is on you. And, you're sort of at an impasse because then the theists would say, you have to, give me a reason why you think there's no God, and you don't get anywhere.
Yeah, I think this is really interesting point to make because, and it's not this definition of atheism thing is not something I like talking about a lot. But I think in this particular instance, it's a really good point, and because what we're talking about now here is like we're talking about from the philosophical standpoint. Now, in everyday life, when this conversation comes up, and even on this show, when people call in and ask about atheism and things, my normal response is just simply that I don't believe in God, because I'm not going to argue for fucking 20 minutes about the meaning of the word atheism, because it is a word that has different meanings, and all of them legitimately so. I think, what you've just said is a good standpoint, because I've just mentioned, and it's a good counterbalance too, I've just mentioned that we have a lot of theists out there who watch YouTube videos and become like really crap internet, philosophers because I've watched a couple of YouTube videos. This applies to the other side as well. Mm-hmm. And our side of the fence has the same thing. I see quite a lot in these conversations that I have people. I have really, really good conversations with, theists about philosophy. Theists who, like yourself, have done degrees in it, but they're from the other side of the fence. And we have those people I tend to have really good conversations with, because that's my field of study anyway. That's my background. And so we have really good, just genuinely good, honest conversations about it. You also have theists who come up and watch a couple of William Lane Craig videos or these other crap apologists who are out there, and they come up with the same crap arguments they do, and they've not put any thought into it. They've not thought about it. And, you can refute God if you know the arguments, but if you've just watched a couple of videos, you are limited to say, and this, again, as stressed, is nothing wrong at all with the definition of atheism that says, I just don't accept God. That's my position on it. There's nothing wrong with that at all. But if you're having a philosophical conversation and you're kind of going down that route, you're going to be left kind of in deep water, because you can have a proper philosophical conversation and not have to go there. You can go into why you don't believe in God and things like that, and it's really, really important. Jim, you look like you want to come in.
So, I mean, also in many cases, like with callers that we've gotten in the past, when you get them onto their back foot and really get them into a corner, one of the tactics is to shift the topic, change the topic. And so one of the ways they'll shift the topic is to simply say, well, you can't prove he doesn't exist. Or prove he doesn't exist. That is a change of topic to avoid being in a corner where they either have to admit what they believe makes no sense, or concede whatever point you're trying to make, right? And they don't want to do that. They can't do that in their head, so they'll change the topic. And so I see that definition of atheism as a tactic to stay on target and to stay on topic, because I mean, you can watch a lot of these types of shows, and sometimes the caller is able to run the host around in circles. They never really stay on topic, and I'm guilty of that too, of not keeping people on topic, especially when you've got them at a point where they have to concede a point or concede that they're being illogical, right? So sometimes it's a conversational rebuttal, not a philosophical rebuttal, but it's a conversation rebuttal to a shift in topic, so they don't have to admit that they're being illogical or concede your point. So sometimes it's that. And that's two different things I think we have to realize. There's philosophical argument, and then there's conversational argument styles and tactics that can be used. And they aren't the same, and the conversational ones don't have anywhere near the rigor of the philosophical ones, but they're the ones we have more often than we do philosophical ones. So I think sometimes just to kind of remember that too is it's a tactic, conversational tactic to get out of a corner.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, I'll just add one last thing before I leave. But basically, when you have a theist and atheist, and theists, let's say that they don't really have a good argument, but ultimately it's just their feeling. And then you have an atheist who, doesn't believe a God because there's no evidence for it. And you can kind of see that for both of them, it's essentially a belief state, right? Until someone can provide something more concrete. And so when a theist provides, some, not so good argument, from their point of view, they've made the best argument, for the proof of God that no one could refute. And from the atheist point of view, they're not convinced, so they just kind of stay on the kind of I'm not convinced point. And then, you can't really have a conversation at that point.
I would slightly push back on that, because I think the thing is, when you're looking at justification for something, you can reasonably say, I would say anyway, that you can reasonably say that if there isn't evidence for something and somebody is claiming that thing exists, you have a better state of justification than they do for not accepting that thing. And it's a bit like Russell's teapot. If we don't have whether it's there or not is largely irrelevant. That you're claiming that it's there when there's nothing to suggest it's there, that there is no evidence to suggest it's there, is kind of you have less justification in that belief state than you do in the belief that it's not there because there's no evidence.
Yeah, and I think that's where you get to more of a philosophical discussion where the atheist can put in the justification to why their belief state is such, and why it makes sense to hold this belief state rather than, believing something where there is no evidence. So that's where it can kind of progress into the philosophical discussion. But, I do feel like there are a lot of debates, quote unquote debates, that people have where they're just essentially, staking out their own belief states.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. Q, we're going to let you go. We're going to kind of wrap the show up. I appreciate the call. I like that call. We don't get many kind of calls that are purely on philosophy without people trying to throw us as shit kind of YouTube style philosophy at you. So it's nice to have a kind of call that's in my wheelhouse without I don't know what field house is. I don't know why I said that. Wheelhouse without having that argumentation where we can have just a simple, good conversation about it. So I really do appreciate that call. I do want to say before we do go on to any announcements that if any of you thinking that's Mary Magdalene behind me, I just want to assure you that it's actually Mary, the mother of God, that Jesus is trying to stick his tongue down the throat. So, because that's just I just feel that's the kind of fella Jesus was. He just liked to give his mum a good tonguing in various holes. So, anyway, on that point, the prompt for this week is God's creation won't be complete until it creates blank. Reply in the comments and tune in at the beginning of next week's episode to hear the top 3 answers. Let's throw some love rings out there. Let's throw some love rings out there for God, who's tried unsuccessfully twice today to end the show by intervening with our technology and failing miserably because he's a little bit crap. We are going to be, both myself and Jim are going to be in the ACD Discord after the show. So if you want to continue the conversation, jump over there. And if you don't believe, this is your community and we appreciate you being here. And if you do believe, we don't hate you. We are just not convinced. We will see you next time.
We want the truth, so watch Truth Wanted live Friday at 7 p.m. Central. Visit tiny.cc/YTTW and call into the show at 512-991-9242 or connect to the show online at tiny.cc/calltw.